The twin suns of Varus bled red light across a dying world. Once, the planet had been a kingdom of proud warriors, a people who sang their victories in the air and etched their defeats in stone so they would never be forgotten. The Varians believed that honor was not a word, but a living force, breathed into the steel of their weapons and the bones of their dead. And none embodied that code more fiercely than Captain Saris Kavar, commander of the Silver Guard, defender of the citadel of Solkra. But the Dominion came like a plague. It began with a shimmer in the night sky, stars that moved against the heavens' rhythm. The Varians thought they were comets until the first bombardment fell. The Zeroth Dominion, a vast empire of warlords, machines, and gene-melded soldiers, had swept through a dozen systems, enslaving every species that stood in their path. When they reached Varus, they did not speak of surrender or diplomacy. They sent one transmission only: bow or burn. Saris refused. She had never learned how to bow. For 7 days and nights, the Varian armies fought against ships that blotted out the suns. Plasma scorched the skies, and the air turned thick with the metallic taste of ash. The Dominion's ground legions, armored beasts and cybernetic infantry, poured through the broken gates of Solkra. The Silver Guard fought until the marble streets ran with molten glass. Saris herself held the citadel's steps with only 12 remaining warriors, swinging her ancestral blade Ekerend, its edge glowing white-hot, its voice singing through the smoke. When the final Dominion assault came, she stood alone. Her armor was shattered, her breath ragged, her body screaming for mercy, but she did not kneel. Even when they tore the standard from her hand, even when they broke her blade in two, she kept fighting, stabbing with fragments and fists until a Dominion trooper struck her across the temple and sent her to the ground. She awoke in chains, beneath the broken gates of her own home. The air stank of plasma and death. Her soldiers' bodies were piled in burning heaps. The warlord Kryn Vol, master of the Dominion's 13th Armada, descended from his flagship to inspect his prize. He was not fully organic, his flesh fused with black chrome, a crown of wiring pulsing behind his skull. His eyes glowed an eerie blue as he studied the fallen captain. "You are Saris Kavar?" he asked, his voice like grinding stone. "I am captain of the Silver Guard," she spat. "And this is Varus. You are trespassing." Kryn Vol laughed, a deep broken sound, almost mechanical. He reached out, seized her by the braid of her hair, a sacred symbol among her people, and with one savage motion drew a blade across it. The severed strands fell into the dust. "No more, Captain," he said. "No more name. You are nothing now." He ripped the sigil of her rank from her chestplate and threw it into the fire. Then he held up the broken halves of her sword, admiring the molten shimmer before casting them aside. "The Dominion has no need for pride," he sneered. "Only obedience." That moment was worse than death. Among the Varians, losing one's blade was losing one's soul. But when Kryn Vol turned away, Saris whispered an oath through bloodied lips, a promise not to the gods, but to the memory of her people. "You will not own my spirit." The survivors of Varus were herded into slave transports and shipped to various Dominion worlds. Saris was sent to Dranth 9, a mining planet that hung like a dying ember near a collapsing star. It was a world of smoke and black heat, its skies forever shrouded in volcanic ash. There she became prisoner, 1423, stripped of title, rank, and name. The mines of Dranth 9 were not meant for living things. Every day, thousands of captives toiled under the glare of red suns, extracting volatile minerals that fed the Dominion's war machine. The air was poison. The water was dust. Overseers patrolled the tunnels in armor that hissed with cooling vents, their plasma whips snapping at the slow and the weak. Saris labored among the broken and hopeless, beings from a dozen conquered worlds. She watched them die by the hundreds. She did not mourn them. She could not afford to. Grief was a luxury, and survival was all she had left. The heat scarred her skin, the fumes burned her throat, but she refused to collapse. She would live not for hope, but for vengeance. Time became meaningless, a blur of fire, pain, and exhaustion. The Dominion didn't kill its slaves quickly. It let them erode one day at a time. Yet even as her body weakened, the ember of defiance never fully died. Sometimes, deep in the mines, she would feel the echo of her old self, the captain who had once commanded 1,000 warriors. The memory was agony. Then came the day that changed everything. A tremor shook the mine shafts, not the usual rumble of machinery or quakes, but something deeper, sharper. Alarms blared in the upper tunnels. Guards shouted in a language of clicks and static. Through a narrow vent, Sarah saw a streak of flame across the gray sky. A ship, small and burning, falling fast. Hours later, whispers rippled through the camps. A crash in the outer dunes, a survivor captured. Most assumed it was another Dominion vessel. But when the guards dragged the prisoner through the pits, Sarah saw something she had never seen before. The being was tall, battered, wrapped in a torn suit of matte armor marked with strange insignia, a blue circle with white stars. His skin was pale, his hair dark, his eyes burning with a defiance that did not belong in this graveyard of souls. He looked human. Saris had heard the name humans whispered in the mines, newcomers from a small, unaligned system on the galactic fringe. A species too young to understand fear, too reckless to understand surrender. They were a rumor, little more than legend. Yet here one was, bloodied but unbowed. The overseers shoved him to his knees. One struck him with the butt of a rifle, demanding submission. The man just spat blood into the dust and smiled. "You can chain me," he said, his voice low but steady. "But you can't own me." For the first time in years, Saris felt something ignite inside her. A spark. The sound of defiance was like music she had forgotten existed. The overseers laughed and dragged the human toward the lower cells, but the words stayed with her long after the echoes faded. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stared at the black ceiling of her cell, tracing the cracks like constellations, and for the first time since her capture, she remembered the sound of the Varian battle drums. She remembered the feel of her sword in her hand, the taste of cold air after victory. She remembered who she had been. When the lights dimmed for the artificial night cycle, she whispered through the vent near her cot, the one that linked her cell to the lower tunnels. "Human," she called softly, uncertain if he would hear. "Do you want to live?" For a moment there was only silence. Then a voice came back, dry and amused despite everything. "Lady, I don't do anything else." That simple answer shattered the weight of her years in captivity. The next day, she saw him again, this time working in the same mining sector, chained at opposite ends of a conveyor belt. He noticed her scars, the marks of rank once carved into her armor now burned into flesh. When their eyes met, she saw no pity there, only recognition, as if he saw not a slave, but a warrior who had forgotten her weapon. For weeks, they labored side by side. They didn't speak much. Conversation was forbidden, but small gestures passed between them. A nod, a glance, a shared warning when the overseers approached. Little things, but enough to form a bond in the silence of suffering. She learned his name from another prisoner, Marcus Hale, a lieutenant of something called the United Earth Navy. He had been scouting near the Dranth Belt when Dominion warships ambushed his team. His ship was destroyed. His escape pod barely survived atmospheric entry. Now, he was one man trapped in a hell that didn't even know what humans were capable of. Saris didn't know whether to call him brave or insane. Perhaps both. One evening, after a cave-in cut power to their section, the guards left the captives in darkness for hours. In that void, Marcus spoke again. "I've seen worse," he said. "You lie," Saris replied flatly. "Maybe," he admitted. "But I'll see better too." That's the trick. Something in his tone, casual, steady, unbroken, infuriated her. How could he still hope? Yet at the same time, it fascinated her. In him, she saw the same fire that once burned in Varian warriors before the Dominion crushed it out of them. The next day, he was punished for speaking back to an overseer. They beat him in front of the others, left him bleeding in the dirt. The other prisoners turned away, afraid. But as the guards marched off, Saris knelt beside him. "Why do you provoke them?" She hissed. Because silence kills slower, he murmured, smiling weakly. And I'm not patient. That night, the old fire inside her finally broke through the years of ash and despair. She realized that she was no longer merely surviving. She was waiting for a reason to fight again. In Marcus Hale, she found that reason. The mines of Dranthnaim still burned. The Dominion still ruled, and Saras Kavar was still nameless in their records. But something had changed. A single human had fallen from the sky and reminded her of what she once swore to protect. Not just her planet or her people, but the very idea that honor could never be truly destroyed. She looked out across the endless pits, the rivers of molten ore, the towers of smoke that blotted out the stars, and for the first time in years, she smiled, because she knew the Dominion had made a mistake. They had left a spark alive, and sparks, when fanned by fury and purpose, could burn empires to ash. That night, as Marcus lay shackled in the darkness, Saras whispered through the vents once more, her voice a whisper of steel, human. "You said you don't die easily?" "That's right." "Good," she said, "because soon you'll need that." The Dominion thought they had erased Saras Kavar, but beneath the mines of Dranthnaim, a new legend was being born, one forged of broken blades, human stubbornness, and the fury of a fallen captain ready to rise again. And though the stars above could not yet see it, the first tremor of rebellion had already begun. The next days in the mines of Dranthnaim were not the same. Something invisible had shifted, a vibration, faint but spreading. It was not in the machines or the tunnels, but in the prisoners themselves. Those who had once moved like ghosts now glanced at one another when the guards passed. Those who used to whisper only to beg for water now whispered to remember names. And at the center of it all was a human, a single man who refused to bow. Marcus Hale worked like everyone else, hauling molten ore, dragging cables, breathing poison. But there was a difference in the way he carried himself. He didn't shuffle like a captive. He walked like a soldier stripped of his weapon, but not his cause. His eyes didn't wander downward. They were always moving, scanning, reading. The Dominion guards thought he was just stubborn. They didn't realize he was studying them, learning their routes, their shift cycles, the timing of their plasma vents, and the sequence of the security drones that circled every chamber. Saras Kavar watched him silently. At first, she didn't trust him. Hope was dangerous in a place like this. It got people killed. But the more she saw, the more she recognized something that felt almost alien to her now. Strategy. The human wasn't waiting to die. He was planning. He had the mind of a soldier, the instincts of a commander. Every time he was punished for speaking out, she noticed how he counted the guards, how he noted the weapons they carried. Each blow seemed to add to some invisible calculation in his mind. He didn't react with rage or submission. He absorbed everything. Saras realized he was measuring the Dominion the way she used to measure her enemies before a strike. Weeks passed. Saras began to move closer during shifts, working on the same line or near the same loading point. Words were dangerous under the eyes of the overseers, but they found ways to communicate. Short phrases, coded gestures, glances. When a guard turned his back, Marcus would mutter under his breath, "Vent system loops every 6 hours," or "Energy readings spike before they cycle the plasma injectors." "Weak point, maybe." And Saras would pretend to ignore him, but her mind would record every detail. The Dominion believed their slaves incapable of such thought. They underestimated the hunger that comes from years of silence and fury. One night, a dust storm ripped across the surface, tearing through the mining complex's upper scaffolds. The Dominion pulled most guards to repair duty, leaving only drones in the lower levels. It was the first time in years the prisoners were left mostly unwatched. Marcus took the risk. He slipped from his assigned sector into the abandoned engineering corridor, moving between shadows. He found what he'd been looking for, a deactivated console half buried in debris. The Dominion systems were alien, complex, but logic was universal. He worked quietly, prying open panels, reading the patterns of data lights. He couldn't fully hack it, but he could understand enough to learn that the mine's power grid ran through the same conduits that fueled the orbital defense relays. If someone could overload the internal reactors, it wouldn't just disable the mines, it would cripple every Dominion ship docked above. It was an impossible plan. But impossible plans were humanity's specialty. Ceres found him when he returned to the pits. She could see the soot on his hands, the faint spark of triumph in his eyes. "You're going to get yourself killed," she said. "Probably," he replied. "But not before I take a few of them with me." She studied him, this strange creature who treated death like an inconvenience. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: curiosity. What kind of species created a man who could smile in chains? That night, she made a choice. She found a piece of metal buried near the slag heaps, dull, twisted, but unmistakable. A fragment of her old blade, Ekorend. The Dominion must have melted the rest into scrap, but somehow this sliver had survived. She stared at it for a long time, fingers tracing the grooves that had once sung with the energy of her ancestors. The memory hurt like a wound. The next day, Marcus saw her holding it during the shift and recognized the reverence in her touch. When the guards moved out of earshot, he whispered, "That yours?" She nodded once. "It was called Ekorend. It carried my family's honor." "Looks broken." "So am I." "Nah," Marcus said, smiling faintly. "You're just under repair." It was such a small thing to say, but it struck deeper than any speech. That night, he found her again after lights out, carrying a handful of scavenged tools and a piece of Dominion metal pried from a damaged loader. He motioned for her to bring the shard. Together, they sat in the dim red glow of the emergency lights, working in silence. Marcus melted, hammered, and fused. The smell of plasma filled the air. Sparks hissed off the walls, but he kept going, shaping the hybrid blade by hand. Ceres guided him where her knowledge surpassed his, showing him how to temper the metal, how to breathe when aligning the balance. It wasn't the weapon it once was, but when it cooled, Ekorend lived again, its edge laced with human steel and alien alloy. When he handed it to her, the sword vibrated softly, reacting to the energy in her palms. For a moment, Ceres couldn't speak. She had thought her honor lost forever. Now it glowed faintly before her eyes. "Why help me?" she asked quietly. "Because tyrants don't stay dead unless someone kills them," Marcus said. "And you look like you've been waiting to start." Something inside her broke open. She had endured years of torment, but this single human, this stranger from a backwater world, had restored the one thing she thought irretrievable: her will. From then on, they worked as one. Marcus began spreading his plan through the prisoners, not loudly, not openly, but in whispers and gestures. He taught them how to disrupt drones with scrap magnets, how to jam Dominion scanners with ore dust. Ceres reawakened her command instincts, organizing small groups, teaching them discipline, formation, unity. Under her, the chaos of slaves became the structure of soldiers. The transformation was slow, hidden beneath the Dominion's notice. To the guards, they were still beaten, broken workers. To each other, they were a gathering storm. Ceres saw something miraculous. Aliens of species that had once hated each other now stood shoulder to shoulder. Her voice carried across the darkness, teaching them old Varian chants, rhythmic tones meant to synchronize heartbeat and breath during battle. Marcus watched in awe. "You sing before a fight?" "Always," she said. "It reminds the soul why it fights." "Humans just curse and charge." "Then perhaps," Ceres smiled thinly, "we will do both." Days turned into weeks, and the rebellion's skeleton took shape. Marcus mapped the tunnels. Ceres found weaknesses in patrols. They learned the timing of power surges, how to use mining plasma as improvised explosives. The plan was brutal and simple. Overload the main reactors, destroy the Dominion's grip on Dranth 9, and send a message to the stars. Varus still breathes. Humanity still fights, but there was a cost. During one of their covert missions to steal detonator cores, a drone spotted them. They barely escaped into a ventilation shaft, alarms echoing through the mines. Dominion soldiers stormed the lower sectors, dragging prisoners for interrogation. Dozens were executed. Saris wanted to stop to regroup, but Marcus shook his head. "We can't go back now," he said. "They'll just rebuild the cage. We have to burn it down." She looked at him, seeing the same cold determination she had once known in her own reflection. He reminded her of herself, not the woman she was in chains, but the captain she'd been before. In the following days, Dominion brutality increased. Whips cracked harder, food rations halved, executions public. But instead of breaking them, it fueled them. Every lash made the fire hotter. Every corpse reminded them why they had to win. One evening, Marcus stood in front of a crowd of weary prisoners, their faces lit by the dull red glow of the molten rivers. His voice was low but fierce. "They think we're slaves. They think they own us because they've beaten us. But they don't understand what we are. We're the ones who build their empires, mine their metals, run their ships. Without us, they're nothing. So tomorrow, we remind them what happens when nothing decides to fight back." His words were like oxygen in a vacuum. Saris stepped forward beside him, her reforged blade gleaming faintly. "They took our names," she said, her voice steady, almost ritual. "They took our honor, our worlds, our dead. But they did not take our will. The Dominion will remember this day, not as the day they ruled us, but the day they woke us." The crowd roared, voices echoing through the caverns. That night, the uprising began. They struck with precision and fury. Stolen tools became weapons. Mining plasma became bombs. Drones fell from the sky, and Dominion guards vanished into the fire. Marcus led the charge through the lower tunnels, cutting power lines and detonating coolant tanks. Saris moved like a storm through the ranks of guards, her hybrid blade cutting arcs of molten light. For every fallen prisoner, 10 rose in their place. The Dominion's command center sent desperate signals to orbit, but the human sabotage had already crippled communications. Chaos spread through the facility. As the fighting raged, Marcus and Saris reached the central reactor shaft, a colossal pit glowing with raw plasma. The plan was simple: overload it. They had one chance. Marcus rerouted the conduits, while Saris held the line against advancing Dominion reinforcements. Her blade clashed with plasma pikes. Her armor melted in places, but she didn't falter. 5 seconds, Marcus shouted. "Then make them count," she roared back. When he hit the final switch, the mines erupted in a thunderclap of light and flame. The shockwave tore through the Dominion stronghold, collapsing tunnels and sending ships in orbit spinning. The explosion burned so bright that even the dark sky of Dranth 9 glowed for the first time in centuries. The slaves of 100 worlds were free. In the aftermath, Marcus found Saris half buried under debris. Her armor shattered, her sword cracked again. He pulled her free, coughing through the smoke. "You're not dying here," he said. "I already did," she whispered, gripping the broken blade. "But thanks to you, I remember how to live." For the first time since her fall, Saris Kavar stood as a captain again, not of soldiers bound by code, but of rebels bound by purpose. And beside her stood a human who had given her something greater than victory. He had given her back her flame. In the silence after the blast, the prisoners looked to her for orders, and she, their reborn leader, gave them the only one that mattered. "We rise." They marched out of the burning mines into the wastelands, free for the first time in years, a legion of the forgotten, led by a woman who had regained her name and a human who had dared to believe she could. The Dominion would soon return in force. But for now, Varus's spirit had been reborn in the fire of rebellion, the bond of defiance and the will of 2 warriors who refused to bow to any empire. The spark had become a blaze. Smoke still drifted from the shattered tunnels of Dranth 9. But the fires that now burned were not Dominion-forged. They were born of rebellion. The slaves who had once crawled through darkness now stood in the open light, weapons scavenged from the wreckage, faces blackened by soot and victory. For the first time in centuries, the mines echoed not with screams, but with war cries. The uprising had not been a whisper anymore. It was a roar that the Dominion could no longer ignore. Saris Kavar stood at the mouth of the ruined shaft, her half-cracked armor glowing faintly from the heat, her hybrid blade humming in her hand. The weapon was scarred and uneven, but alive as she was. Marcus Hale, equally battered and burned, stood beside her, wiping ash from his face. Below them, 1,000 freed slaves looked up, waiting for orders. Saris had never seen such a sight. A patchwork army of species once divided by fear and conquest, now standing shoulder to shoulder. Some still wore their chains, others carried only tools turned into weapons. But they all had the same look in their eyes, the same relentless defiance that she had seen in Marcus's gaze when he first refused to kneel. "They'll send reinforcements," Marcus said, voice hoarse. "Let them come," Saris replied. "We have something they'll never understand." "What's that?" "Nothing left to lose," he smiled, a thin line through blood and grime. "Yeah," he said. "That's when humans fight best, too. They had no ships, no orbital defense, no real strategy. Yet they had momentum. And that was a weapon all its own. The Dominion's communication array was still partially functional, but Marcus had disabled the main relay. They had a window, maybe hours, before the fleet above learned the full scale of the rebellion. Saris ordered the prisoners to scavenge weapons, strip the fallen guards, and pull wounded allies to safety. The plan was simple: hold the mines until they could find a way out of Dranth 9. But survival was never simple. By dawn, Dominion dropships began descending through the smoke-filled atmosphere, sleek and black like predators smelling blood. Saris felt the tremors underfoot as troop carriers landed on the upper plains. They were coming, an entire regiment to crush the rebellion before it could spread. Marcus climbed a wrecked scaffold, binoculars cracked but usable. "At least 3 heavy carriers," he muttered. "Could be 1,000 soldiers, maybe more." "Then they outnumber us 10 to 1, Saris said. "Good odds," Marcus smirked. "Wouldn't want it to be boring." She gave him a look that was half disbelief, half admiration. Humanity's madness, she was learning, was their greatest weapon. They didn't retreat. Instead, they prepared the battlefield. Marcus turned the mines themselves into a trap. He used the Dominion's own infrastructure, fuel conduits, coolant chambers, power cores, to lace the tunnels with explosives and collapse points. Saris organized the freed captives into strike teams, each commanded by those who had fought in the earlier uprising. Every alien, every human, every broken soul had a task. While Marcus and his tech crews worked, Saris walked among the rebels. She did not give speeches. She gave purpose. She reminded them that the Dominion fed on obedience, that every moment they stood defiant was a wound in the Empire's heart. One young slave, a reptilian mechanic named Tor, trembled as he held a makeshift spear. "Captain," he said, his voice breaking. "What if we fail?" Saris put a hand on his shoulder. "Then we die on our feet," she said, "and not as ghosts." It was enough. When the Dominion forces finally advanced, they came in perfect formation, rows of armored troopers, flanked by quadrupedal drones and heavy walkers. Their plasma cannons turned the air to light. Saris and Marcus waited for them in silence at the edge of the main quarry. The wind howled through the open pit, carrying the heat of molten ore. Then Saris raised her sword. The blade gleamed in the dim light, half forged from human steel, half from Varian star metals, and shouted, "For the Nameless!" The rebels erupted behind her, their voices rising like thunder. The Dominion advanced, firing plasma into the dark. But the first ranks triggered the hidden traps Marcus had planted. The ground exploded beneath them, sending shockwaves through the formation. Walkers collapsed into molten pools. Soldiers screamed as the tunnels caved in. From the shadows, Saris led her strike teams, swift, precise, unstoppable. They hit from the sides, disappearing before the Dominion could regroup. Marcus fought like a man born to chaos, wielding a stolen plasma rifle in one hand and a mining axe in the other. "Keep them chasing us," he shouted. "Make them think we're running." He was leading them into the core, the heart of the mine, where the Dominion's main reactor pulsed like a beating sun. If they could overload it, the explosion would tear through the entire garrison, a single strike to cripple the entire Dominion presence on Dranth 9. But the Dominion commander was not a fool. When Kryn Vole himself arrived, the battle changed. The warlord descended in his exo-armor, a monstrous fusion of machine and flesh, his voice amplified through metallic speakers. "Kavar!" he roared, the name echoing like thunder. "I see the dog still has teeth." Sarah stepped forward, sword raised. The sight of him reignited every buried rage inside her. The day he cut her braid, stripped her name, shattered her honor. She had waited years for this moment. "You should have finished me when you had the chance," she said. "I did," Kryn Vole sneered. "I made you nothing." Marcus stood beside her. "Funny," he said, aiming his rifle. "She doesn't look like nothing to me." Kryn Vole raised a plasma scythe longer than Marcus was tall. "Then you die first, human." The battle between them was chaos incarnate. Saris charged first, her sword clashing with the warlord's weapon, sending arcs of energy screaming through the air. Sparks lit the cavern walls. Marcus fired volleys at weak points in the exo-armor, forcing Kryn to divide his focus. But the warlord was faster than anything they'd faced. Each blow from his scythe struck with enough force to shatter stone. Saris barely dodged, her armor melting under the heat. She countered with precise strikes, the movements of a warrior who had once commanded armies. Still, she was losing ground. Kryn slammed her backward into a wall, denting her armor. He raised his scythe for the killing blow. And then a plasma burst from Marcus's rifle slammed into his shoulder, staggering him. Sarah seized the moment. With a roar that shook the cavern, she drove her blade upward, slicing through the seams of his armor. Sparks and black ichor burst out. Kryn howled, slamming her aside, but she was already back on her feet. "You cannot kill what is eternal," he screamed. "Then I will end eternity," she snarled. They clashed again, steel and plasma intertwining. Each strike sent shockwaves through the cavern. Marcus worked frantically at the reactor's console, rerouting energy. The overload sequence began, lights flashing red across the chamber. "Saris," he shouted. "You need to move, now! Not until he's dust!" The reactor core began to scream, plasma lines cracking. Kryn lunged one final time, but Saris sidestepped, drove her sword deep into his chest, and twisted. The warlord's armor exploded in a burst of energy, throwing them both backward. Marcus reached her through the chaos, dragging her toward the exit. The ground shook, molten cracks splitting open. "We have to go," he yelled. "I have to finish it," she coughed. "Varus must be avenged." "It already is," he said. "You're alive! That's your vengeance!" He pulled her through collapsing corridors, the blast wave chasing them. They burst into the open just as the reactor detonated. The explosion was like a second sunrise. The entire mining complex erupted into the sky, a plume of molten fire that shattered the Dominion fleet in orbit. The shock wave rippled across the planet, wiping out every Dominion outpost within range. The freed slaves watched from the plains as the fortress burned, their cheers swallowed by the roar of the inferno. For the first time in history, a Dominion world had fallen not to a fleet, but to the will of the broken. Marcus collapsed beside Saris, both of them gasping for air. Her sword was nearly destroyed, glowing faintly in the ash. He looked at her and grinned weakly. "Remind me never to argue with you again," she smirked. "Then you'd stop being human." In the days that followed, they gathered what survivors they could. The Dominion would send more forces soon, perhaps an entire armada. But for now, the people of Dranth 9 were free. The rebellion spread like wildfire across the Dominion's networks. Messages, whispered and encoded, carried a single name: Saris Kavar of Varus, the captain reborn. Among those who heard was the United Earth Navy. On outposts and carriers, in spaceports and colonies, the message echoed, "Human aid requested on Dranth 9, Dominion defeated." Survivors holding ground, and humanity answered. Weeks later, as Saris looked to the black horizon, she saw something new. Ships entering orbit, their hulls gleaming silver and blue. Human ships, Earth's fleet had come. She turned to Marcus, her voice low, full of disbelief and awe. "You called them? You didn't think I'd fight a war without backup, did you?" She laughed, the sound raw and unfamiliar but real. For the first time in years, she felt not vengeance but hope. The Dominion had tried to crush her name, to erase her existence, to break her blade. But from the ashes of the mines of Dranth Nye, she had become something greater, a symbol and humanity. The wild species of survivors from a distant blue world had become her allies, not just saviors, but equals in defiance. As the first human warships descended through the smoke, Saris lifted her cracked blade toward the stars. "This isn't over," she whispered. Marcus looked up beside her. "No," he said. "It's just getting started." The fire beneath the mines had burned away the chains. And now, that fire was ready to consume an empire. The sky above Dranth Nye was no longer gray with ash. It was alive with war. The Dominion Armada had come to reclaim what they'd lost. Dozens of warships, black and angular, emerged from hyperspace in precise formation. Their drives pulsed with crimson light, their weapons already charged. The Empire would not forgive humiliation, and the destruction of an entire Dominion command post was more than that. It was heresy. But this time, Saris Kavar was not alone. From the burned world below, the humans of the United Earth Navy had arrived. The First Fleet, small, experimental, battered from a dozen other conflicts, now stood between the Dominion and the planet's surface. Their ships were old but deadly, built for endurance and improvisation. No human vessel looked the same. Each bore scars and jury-rigged armor, each humming with the stubborn soul of its crew, and leading them was the man who had started it all, Marcus Hale. The scavenger turned freedom fighter, now standing on the bridge of the captured Dominion frigate Vigilant Ember. Saris stood beside him, her armor reforged from the alloy of fallen enemies, her half-human, half-Varian blade glowing in her hand. She had cut her hair herself this time, not as a mark of shame, but as a warrior's vow. "They'll come with full fleet strength," Marcus said, scanning the tactical map. "Good," Saris replied. "Then we end this here." The Dominion's flagship, the Omen of Chains, hung above the planet like a blade of shadow. Its commander, Admiral Vor, had sworn to erase Saris Kavar from history himself. The humans had fewer ships, maybe a tenth the Dominion's number, but Marcus didn't care. "We've got fire, we've got fury, and we've got people who don't quit." The comm channels flickered as human captains called in, voices crackling with defiant humor. "This is the Soul's wrath, ready to burn bright. Tarkov's Pride shields online. We've got the mining lasers from Dranth Nine's surface rigged as artillery. Just say the word. The rebellion wasn't a single army anymore, it was a movement. Humans, Varians, and dozens of other freed species had united under one purpose: freedom." Marcus looked to Saris. "You started this," he said quietly. "They're fighting for you." "No," she said, voice cold as forged steel. "They're fighting for themselves. That's what makes them unstoppable." The battle began with light. The Dominion's first volley was a storm, plasma beams tearing through space, obliterating debris fields and shattering the remains of the orbital station. Human ships darted and weaved between the blasts, smaller, faster, unpredictable. "Evasive pattern Echo 7, Marcus barked. "Return fire with everything we've got!" The Vigilant Ember's cannons roared, launching volleys of railgun rounds and captured Dominion plasma torpedoes. Human ships didn't fight clean. They fought clever. A Dominion cruiser moved to flank them, only to collide with a wave of asteroids that Marcus had pre-placed as kinetic mines. The explosion tore through its hull, scattering molten shards into space. "Nice shot," Saris said. "I learned from the best," he replied, eyes flicking toward her. Below them, on the surface, the rebellion's ground forces prepared for what came next. Saris's second-in-command, Tor, led the freed miners and alien fighters. They manned the captured Dominion artillery, turning it skyward. Massive plasma lances rose from the ground, striking the invading fleet like lightning from a planet that refused to kneel. Every hit was a message. We are still here. But Admiral Vore was not reckless. He had studied human tactics, chaos, unpredictability, stubborn courage, and he intended to crush it with precision. "Target their command vessel," Vore ordered. "Break their will. Kill their heroes." Hundreds of Dominion fighters swarmed toward the vigilant Ember. Marcus's ship shuddered under the assault. The bridge lights flickered. Alarms screamed. "Shields at 40%. A crewman shouted. "Reroute from propulsion," Marcus barked. "We hold the line." Saris took command of the gun decks herself, moving with inhuman speed, cutting down boarding drones that managed to breach. Her blade sang through metal and sparks. Every strike was a memory, every parry a promise. Then the Dominion flagship fired its main cannon. The beam tore through space like the wrath of a god. It hit one of the human destroyers, Tarkov's Pride, and split it apart in a burst of white light. The explosion rippled across the fleet. Marcus froze for half a second, eyes wide at the devastation. The comm crackled. "This is Sol's wrath. Captain Tarkov's gone." "We keep fighting," Marcus said, voice steady. "He'd haunt us if we didn't." He turned to Saris. "We can't win by matching their firepower. We need to cut off their head. You want to take out Vore. Exactly. You said it once. Empires bleed from the top. It was madness, and that's why it would work." Marcus ordered the vigilant Ember on a direct collision course toward the Omen of Chains. The human fleet formed a screen, drawing fire, giving cover. Ships burned, tore apart, and still advanced. Humanity didn't retreat. They endured. Saris took her place beside him on the bridge, the two warriors standing amid the chaos, surrounded by fire and death. "You sure about this?" she asked. "No," Marcus grinned. "That's how I know it's right." The vigilant Ember dove through the Dominion ranks, taking hit after hit. Hull plates peeled away, oxygen vented into space, alarms howled. Then, contact. They breached the flagship's lower hangar in a burst of shattered metal and flame. The boarding team was small, Marcus, Saris, and a handful of survivors. They fought through corridors crawling with Dominion soldiers. Saris's blade cut arcs of blue light through their ranks. Marcus moved like a ghost, shooting, dodging, planting explosives. The deeper they went, the thicker the resistance became, until they reached the command spire, where Admiral Vore waited. He was massive, encased in gilded armor, his voice dripping venom. "The traitor and the savage," he said. "You crawl into the heart of your doom." "We came to return the favor," Marcus said. Vore's gauntlet flared. Energy surged around him. "You think one human and one fallen captain can undo an empire?" "No," Saris said. "But two can start something that never ends." The duel began. Vore's weapon, a double-edged plasma halberd, swung with the weight of a star. Saris met him blow for blow, sparks flying. Marcus darted around the chamber, taking out power nodes, disrupting the flagship's systems. Each strike from Saris was faster, sharper, but Vore was stronger, older, augmented by the Dominion's best. His halberd tore gashes through the floor, his armor absorbing blows that would have killed any normal being. "You cannot restore honor, Kavar," he hissed. "You lost it when you let a human touch your blade." Saris's eyes blazed. "He didn't touch it. He remade it," she feinted, then struck low, cutting through one of Vore's stabilizers. Sparks and blood burst from his leg. He roared, slamming his halberd into her side, throwing her across the chamber. Marcus fired burst after burst into Vore's armor, barely making a dent. The Admiral turned toward him, laughing darkly. "You think your kind can fight gods?" "No," Marcus said. "We just make better monsters." He detonated the charges. The walls exploded inward, venting the chamber to vacuum. The air ripped outward in a cyclone. Vore staggered. Saris, bracing against the wall, launched herself forward, her blade glowing like a star reborn. She drove it straight through his chest. The Dominion Admiral froze, disbelief etched into his monstrous face. His halberd flickered, then fell. Saris leaned close, voice a whisper. "This is for Varus." "For every name you erased," she pulled the blade free. Vor collapsed as the chamber filled with blinding light. The flagship's reactor was overloading. Marcus grabbed her hand. "Time to go!" They sprinted through collapsing corridors, alarms screaming. Fires burst from ruptured conduits. When they reached the hangar, the last of their shuttle crew was waiting, engines already primed. The ship tore free just as the omen of chains erupted behind them in a supernova of white and red. The explosion shattered the Dominion formation. Without command, their ships broke, scattered, or self-destructed. The human fleet, what was left of it, turned their weapons on the retreating enemy and finished what they'd started. When the smoke cleared, the stars above Dranth 9 were quiet. Marcus sat in the pilot's seat, hands shaking. "Tell me we won," he murmured. Saris looked out the viewport, the Dominion fleet gone, their flagships nothing but drifting wreckage. "We did," she said softly. "But not just us. All of us." The rebellion spread beyond imagination. Across the Dominion's countless worlds, slaves rose up. Garrisons fell. The empire cracked, then shattered. The name Kavar became a rallying cry, whispered with reverence, shouted with fury. Months later, when the dust had settled, Saris stood before the new council, a coalition of humans and free species. She was no longer the disgraced captain. She was the first commander of the Free Stars. Marcus stood behind her, still refusing to wear any official title. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. "What? Lead a galaxy?" She smiled faintly. "No, but I'll fight to keep it free." He nodded. "Then I'll fight beside you. Together." They looked out at the reborn fleets, human ships and alien vessels side by side, their insignias not of empires, but of unity. Saris drew her blade, the one Marcus had restored, its edge now engraved with new words: for honor, for freedom, for all who remember. She raised it toward the stars. "They tried to take my name," she said. "Now they will never forget it." The council erupted in cheers. Outside, the ships of the Free Stars rose from orbit, engines burning like dawn, and somewhere beyond the edge of known space, in the ruins of a shattered Dominion relay, a signal pulsed, faint, encrypted, ancient. It spoke in a voice neither human nor Varian. "If humanity can ignite one ember, perhaps the stars will burn anew." The Dominion was gone. But the legend of the human who restored a fallen captain's blade and the warrior who found her honor again would never fade, because in the endless dark, even a single ember could light the universe.